So you've probably heard the rumors about Houdini. Powerful, procedural, but that learning curve feels a bit daunting, am I right? Maybe you've tried it once or even twice, but never gotten the hang of it. And look, when it comes to Cinema 4D, I don't blame you. Cloners, effectors, fields is a great toolkit. That is, until you get a specific round of feedback that requires something the tool just wasn't built for. Suddenly, the cache won't bake, the render looks nothing like your viewport, and an entire day is gone while your creative director is breathing down your neck and your producer is pinging you on Slack about that next posting. Hey, what's up? I'm Joachim, and this is an intro to Houdini for the Cinema 4D Artist. Over the course of these 3 videos, I'll walk you through the core concepts, how Houdini compares to Cinema 4D, and how to translate those workflows that you already know. Enough to get you from 0 to a final moving image. My goal is that by the time you finish watching, Houdini should feel approachable, and you'll have a clear path forward that makes use of the skills that you've already spent years developing inside of Cinema 4D. So if that sounds good, let's dive right in. Alright, so here we are in Houdini, and this is what the default empty canvas looks like the first time you launch the software. There are some similarities and differences of the UI compared to Cinema 4D, so let's first go through some of the panes and windows we'll be working and interacting with. Starting off to the left, we have the scene view, and much like Cinema, this is the area where we can interact with different objects and get visual feedback about our scene. In Cinema, the 3D viewer tends to be a little bit more of where you do the actual work, but due to the procedural nature of Houdini, a lot of times I find myself interacting more with the network viewer, which we can find here at the bottom right. The network view is the area where we can put down nodes or operators that in turn describes our scene. And you can think of the network viewer as sort of the equivalent to Cinema 4D's object manager. So how do we create nodes? With the cursor over the network view, we can create nodes by either right-clicking or by using the tab button, which will bring up the tab menu. Here we can dive into different menus containing different nodes, or we can manually type in the name of the desired node that we want to append. So if I search for box, for example, and click enter, and then if I left-click, it'll append that node into our network view. In this case, it's a geometry network with a box inside of it. If I double-click this node or press the I button while having the node selected, we can jump down one level, and indeed we see that we find a box. Moving up, we have the parameter window, and this window displays the different parameters, sliders, and buttons available for the node that we currently have selected. You can modify any parameter either by manually entering a different value, or if you hold the middle mouse button and slide left or right, you can also modify the parameter this way. This also works in smaller increments as well as bigger increments. If you want to reset a set parameter, you can hold the control button and middle mouse click, and that'll reset the parameter. Just like in Cinema, we can also perform math operations, and we can also perform different functions and variables that are native to Houdini. So for example, we can do 1 plus 1, and if we middle mouse click on the size here, we can see what the result of that is. And as I mentioned, we can also use different functions and variables. So one example of this would be $F, and this will return the current frame number. If we want to delete a channel, we can either right-click and click Delete Channels, or we can do Ctrl plus Shift plus left mouse click. Another way we can add nodes is by clicking the different buttons here at the top, where we have our shelf tools. Shelf tools are essentially collections of nodes, tools, or setups that we can append to our scene. So for example, if I click the sphere, we'll get this gizmo here. And if I left click or hit enter, we can add this into our network as well. I'm going to select the sphere and I'm going to delete it though. And the way we can move around in the scene is by holding down the Alt or Option button, and then with the middle mouse button pressed down, we can pan around. And if we Alt plus left click, we can rotate around, and Alt plus right click will zoom in and out. And you can also use the Alt plus scroll wheel to zoom in and out. Depending on which area you hover your mouse over, you can trigger different display options. So if I hover my mouse over the scene view and press D, it will open the display options for the world. Here we can change different UI settings and the color scheme of the background. I like to keep it to dark, but feel free to pick whichever one you like. And if I hover my mouse over the network view and hit D, it'll open the network view display options. If we then move down to the bottom, we can find the Playbar. And this should feel pretty similar to Cinema 4D, where we can view keyframes and playback animation. If we click this button all the way to the left, we can change our FPS as well as our start and end frame of our timeline. One thing I would highly advise that you have checked is this stopwatch icon. This will just make sure that the playback never exceeds your FPS. If we uncheck this and play, we can see that it tries to play it back as fast as it possibly can. And normally this is not the behavior that you'd want, so I usually leave this toggled on. Houdini is also very customizable, and we can of course modify these different windows and panes into our liking. I would highly recommend that you split the scene view into two, and here's how you do that. If I click this tiny triangle at the top and navigate to split pane top and bottom, or we can also click Alt right bracket. This will create a new scene view for us. And here I'm going to right click and change it from the scene view to the Geometry Spreadsheet. The Geometry Spreadsheet is super useful because it gives you a lot of information about what's going on under the hood about your scene and your geometry. And this comes in super handy when you're debugging your scene and setup. So if I create a sphere, you can see that it updates the information that it shows based on the node that I have selected. One thing that differentiates Houdini from Cinema and other 3D packages is that it kind of operates like a big file browser. So you can, for example, create tabs or windows by either clicking this plus button here, or by using the shortcut Ctrl-T, which mimics the behavior of Windows Explorer, for example. I usually like to have my Redshift render view here, so that I can quickly toggle renders on and off. And this is totally up for preference, but I tend to like my network view to take up as much space as possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to this little triangle here up to the right, and then I'm going to close all tabs. And then instead of having a locked parameter window, I can just toggle it on my keyboard with the letter P. And then I can choose if I want to have it more horizontal or more vertical, with the added benefit of being able to hide it on the fly. Lastly, there's also some different presets that you can pick from here. And you can also create your own and save them out as a custom desktop if you like. So I have some presets here, so this is essentially the same. Some people I know like to work with dual window parameters like this. And the reason why you do that is because then you can easily drag nodes and node references into parameter fields. However, I personally think it gets a little bit cluttered, so that's why I prefer to work in an open space like this. But what I can do instead is the following. So let's say I have some materials that I want to assign to a node. So I can create a material network, and we'll get back to networks in just a second. I'm going to add a Redshift material builder, and then I'm going to hop back up to the object level. I can then hit Shift W to bring up the tree view. And the tree view shows all of our nodes in our scene. So I can just drag our material here, and then I can hit the Shift W to hide it again. One aspect of Houdini that's important to understand is that you'll tend to work in different types of networks or contexts depending on the task that you're doing at any given moment. This can be pretty confusing if you're new, as there's quite a few networks. If I press Tab and search for network, we can see all of the available networks that are available to us inside of Houdini. Right now, we're at the object level. And I like to think of the object level as the place where you perform high-level tasks such as scene assembly, layout, and so on. And this is also the place where you're going to be able to place down cameras and lights, for example. But we'll get more into that in the later parts. However, you'll quickly notice that there's not really a way to modify geometry further on this level. So I can't select the face of this cube, for example, here. And that's because we need to be on the geometry level, or also known as the Sop Context, where we can do modeling or other geometry-based manipulation. In order to access the Sop level, we can either create a geometry node or drop down a Sop network. Either works, as they're both the same node. Now, previously when we created the box, it actually created a geometry node already with a box Sop inside of it. So I'll delete these two nodes. And then if I double click on this node, we'll hop in, and now you can see that it changed from objects to geometry. And if I hit tab, you can see that we get some new menus with a different set of nodes. These nodes that are available on the geometry level, or the Sop context, are referred to as SOPs. And SOP stands for surface operators, if I'm not mistaken. As you're learning Houdini, you're going to come across a lot of these Houdini terms, but all you really need to know is that these nodes are called these ways depending on the context that they're being created within. So you might hear ROPs, COPs, VOPs, a lot of ops, which stands for operators. I personally recommend that you start familiarizing yourself with SOPs first, as this will be the context that you're going to spend a lot of time when you're first learning Houdini. So now, if I hover over the scene view, and click S for select, we can now see that we can select any given polygon on our cube. And this works similar to Cinema, where you can drag and select multiple polygons. You can also click and shift click to select multiple polygons this way, so this should be pretty familiar. And then from here, we can perform an operation such as extruding with the poly extrude, And this will reflect in our network view as well. And you can see as I drag this slider here, or this gizmo, we can see that the parameter updates here. And the beauty of this is, because it's Houdini, this is all procedural. So if I change this to 2, for example, it will run the same operation on primitive number 2. And now you might be thinking, primitive? Isn't that just an object? Well, in Cinema 4D, a primitive is a basic object. It could be a cube, a sphere, a cylinder. But in Houdini, that word means something a little bit different. The first thing I want you to know is that yes, a polygon is in Houdini language referred to as a primitive. But a primitive, and this is what tripped me up in the beginning, a primitive isn't always a polygon. It can also be a curve or a spline as we're used to in Cinema, or a volume, or even a packed instance. We'll touch on packed instances in the following part. The second thing to be aware of is that inside of Houdini's Sop context, geometry is built from 3 things. You have points, vertices, and primitives. Points are just positions in space, so that's pretty easy to understand. And primitives are the connections between those points that form an actual shape. So it could be a spline or a polygon face. And then we have vertices. A vertex is the connection between a point and a primitive. It's what allows the same point to have different UVs or normals per face. But I just like to think of it as a corner of a polygon. If I want to modify the selection, I can press this arrow button here, and then I can shift-click another polygon and press enter, and then that will be added to the selection. I can also change this from connected components to individual elements, and if I remove my selection and click the arrow button again, select a polygon face and hold on Shift plus A plus middle mouse click, it will make a loop selection, and I can hit enter to apply. I can also select with a group, so if you create a group node, there's multiple options here, but I'm going to untoggle the base group and then I'm going to toggle the random by chance. And if we clear out this and select our group instead, it will do the extrusion based on that group. Another thing that tripped me up in the beginning when I started to learn Houdini is that if I create a transform node, for example, sometimes I would see a gizmo where I could interact with this node and sometimes I couldn't. And if you have this problem, all you got to do is press return or enter, and this will move from whichever mode was selected before to this gizmo mode. I don't even know what it's called. But now we're back, so now we can move around. And then I can hit escape to exit that mode. So yeah, this button is pretty important for any scene interaction with nodes. There's multiple ways of disconnecting nodes. You can either just hold the node that you want to disconnect and like shake them off. You can also hold the Y key, which bring up this little scissor, and then you can cut connections this way as well. On our nodes, we have these colored flags. And if we hover over a node, you can see that we have this radial menu. And by default, when you just click this button here, it will toggle the display and render flag. If I go over to the box, I can hold Control and click, and that will toggle the render only flag. And if I go up and if I just fire off render, you can see that now the box without the poly extrude is being rendered, but we can still see the poly extrusion in our viewport. You can also bypass nodes, and you can also lock nodes. And if you click this I button, it'll show us a lot of information about our current network tree. You can also change the wireframe modes here. And if you want to see multiple views of your scene, you can just click this button here and then you have some presets. You can also lock your scene viewer to whichever context that you're currently in. And if you hold it, or if you right click, you can link it to different panes. And that's how you would set up something like this, where you have multiple network views with multiple parameter windows. You can see here on the first one where it says number 1, we have a 1 here and we have a 1 here. And then on the right one, we have a 2 here and a 2 here. So these are going to be linked and these are going to be linked. Lastly, you can also set shortcuts. So for example, if I want to return to this network at any time, I can just hold down the control key and press 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. So you can set 5 shortcuts. So if I do control plus 1 and jump out of my geometry network, and if I press 1, it will jump back to this context. So we can set another shortcut for the material network, hit control plus 2. And now we can always get back to any of these networks with the 1 and the 2 key. If you want to learn more, I highly recommend that you go to the side effects docs. There's some pretty good documentation here and some video examples as well. So yeah, I'll leave that in the description of this video. But yeah, that's about it for part 1 of the series. And I hope some of these things that we've talked about in this tutorial have cleared up some of the confusion around Houdini, and hopefully it will make it a little bit easier to transition over from Cinema 4D to Houdini. As you've seen, there's some similarities between these softwares, but obviously it's going to be quite a different kind of experience considering that Houdini is fully procedural, but that's also part of why it's so much fun to work in. In the next parts, we'll take the knowledge from part 1 and recreate a simple mograph setup in Houdini. I'll show you how I usually set up and organize my work, starting in Sops to lighting, shading, and final render. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next part.